Every regulation is framed to solve or to address some key aspects. Here is Nikhil Narendran, visiting Faculty Daksha Fellowship, explaining the key tenets of telecom regulation in India. Let's listen in.
Quickly moving on to some of the key aspects of the telecom regulation itself. Uh, this is particularly important because most of the telecom regulations per se are often framed in keeping these key tenets in mind. So one important aspect is consumer protection. So from this perspective, there are quality of service guidelines issued by the TRI, which deals with how your broadband should be, how the call connection should be, should there be call drop charges that should be paid, how should the consumer how should the consumers impact due to bad quality of service be regulated, regulations on how billing should be carried out, the detailed billing that you see on your telecom invoices that you get is due to these regulations and for that matter quite strict regulations issued by the TRAI. So quality of service is a very important aspect while one studies the telecom regulations. The second aspect is the tariff. It's again something which comes from the consumer protection. We've seen the TRII played a significant role in bringing down the tariffs in the market. But we should not just credit the TRII. There are other policy regulations which also affected a change of tariff, which have coincided with tries bringing down of the tariffs. We have when the telecom market started off, there was a need for telecom infrastructure, which was hardly present in the country. The largest player at that point of time was where the BSNLs and the MTNLs, which were joined from the Department of Telecommunication, and they had sort of a monopoly over the junction boxes used for terminating the calls or for ensuring the data transfer. And the private players did not have access to it. So slowly, we saw these regulations being changed over time to ensure that companies could move from a heavy capex model to an opex model, where they could rent and hire passive infrastructure, which we'll cover in a bit in detail in some time. They could have a large amount of active infrastructure, which meant that the cost could actually be brought down. There were fuller registrations issued, which meant that the tariffs could be regulated. So it's all interconnected, but consumer protection and tariffs are something which one should keep in mind while looking at telecom. There are also strict regulations about marketing calls and spam calls that happen. So there is a the unsolicited commercial communication regulations of 2018 that the TRI has come out with very recently, with a view to ensure that spam calls and pesky calls are prevented or controlled to a large extent. It's been a never-ending fight for over 20 years, and we are still sort of fighting against this menace, but that's an initiative by TRI. There's also mobile number portability, which is again some sort of a TRI project, which ensures that you can change your service providers without changing your number. There's huge amount of technology, huge amount of thought process that's gone into it, and those regulations are all from a consumer protection. The public good is a very important concept in many of the telecom regulations. So one important concept is access per se, which means that it should be open or accessible to all. There should not be any restriction on whom you give telecom connectivity, provided that they are ready to pay for it. Interconnection is a very important aspect. So this rule in the telecom licenses meant that one player cannot, one cannot lock in the players to themselves, and which means that a BSNL number could make a call to an Airtel number and vice versa, and there is a mandatory interconnection requirement, which is some sort of a must connect requirement that's in place. These requirements are coming from a public good perspective to ensure that the telecom network is not monopolized and they work in tandem with each other to provide a service to the consumer. There is also a large amount of standard setting that forms a part of the telecom licenses, which means that one needs to comply with a particular standard, which are either issued by the Telecom Engineering Center, which is a Government of India body, or internationally accepted standard such as the GSM or even the International Telecom Union (ITU) and IEEE, etc., etc. There's also regulations around emissions, which I spoke about earlier from the perspective of public health. How much emission is permissible for telecom towers, so that it doesn't cause a public health hazard. How much emission is possible from your handheld devices, so that we are not prone to any harm because of such matters. The last one being the net neutrality or discriminatory tariff regulations. That's also brought in from a public good perspective to ensure that there is no discriminatory treatment of traffic, and that everyone on a telecom network, every app or every website or every kind of traffic which flows through a telecom network is treated equally, and there is no preferential treatment meted out to one content over the other. There is also a prohibition on giving out zero rating platforms in the form of discriminatory tariff, which means that you cannot charge differently for the telecom services. The other important aspect one should keep in mind is security. So many of these security conditions have changed over time, and some of them have gotten stricter as the foreign direct investment cap in these telecom companies increase over time. Some of the security restrictions include the fact that foreigners cannot be the CXOs of Indian telecom companies. They should mandatorily be security vetted by the Ministry of Home Affairs to ensure that they don't pose a security threat, including those officials who are in charge of the network, to ensure that there is no sort of backdooring that happens from these networks to countries which are unfriendly to India. There are regulations and restrictions on how these telecom networks could be accessed remotely from outside India. There are restrictions on the way in which the network should be set up. There are a large number of restrictions those. Third is the control over equipment, in the sense that the DoT, we have mentioned this briefly in answer to a question. The DoT has over time come out with regulations which mandate how telecom equipment should be certified and used in a telecom network. What are the basic checks and balances that telcos should take while deploying a network, deploying an equipment in the network? While they they need to take back-to-back undertaking from these equipment suppliers to ensure that there is no foul play, etc., etc. The last aspect being legal interception, which is a very critical aspect when it comes to telecoms, which always meant that the earlier provisions were that there used to be manual phone tapping, which used to happen, where there was a fixed number of calls that a telco should sort of enable. Now, the limited information that we have is we're all moving to what's known as a centralized monitoring system, where the government is cutting out telco as an intermediary and sort of pulling the traffic directly to a centralized surveillance mechanism where they can tap the calls and identify potential threats to national security. That's these sort of legal interception regulations are applicable across all telecom licenses in one way or the other, both for calls and data. And much information is not available in the public about it. So, but that's we have. But many of these regulations often come up, and there are many questions that one often gets when it comes to legal interception. It's very difficult to answer because when you interpret those sections, when you look at those questions, you should always keep in mind the security of the state in mind and interpreting those provisions in the licenses. The government also has a right to take over in times of epidemics, in times of war, in times of scenarios which requires them to take over the equipment and run. We have not seen that happen in full scale ever, but they again retain that right to take over the telecom equipment from a security perspective.